Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Cats HQ podcast. We're back after a week hiatus in which Fletcher was in Colorado Springs to cover both the three current Kentucky freshmen at USA Basketball's U19 camp with John Calipari and 5 or 6, right? Recruits from the class of 2018. He was on hand there for 4 or 5 days. Watched a bunch of practices until they cut the final roster. So most of this episode, we're going to focus on what happened last week, what Fletcher learned from that event, and maybe how we can move that forward both for the current Kentucky team and the recruiting for over the next year. So let's start off there, Fletcher. The big news of the week for Kentucky now was Kevin Knox, apparently from all indications from you and everybody else who was there, was if not the best player, one of the best players there, but came down with a hamstring injury, did not end up making the final roster for the U19 World Cup. Anything that Kentucky fans should be concerned about in terms of Kevin Knox, and maybe what did you learn about him while you were there?
Yeah, I don't think there's any real concern, and I'm not sure. I watched the practice that he supposedly got hurt in, and it was one of his better practices. I think I would say he was the number one player there out of the 27 trying out, and his game was pretty much exactly as advertised. Could play the 2 or the 3. I thought offensively he was as skilled as anybody there, versatile. Defensively, he seemed to handle his business too. So it got down to it, and we had joked, some of these guys might tweak something, and it ended up being that Knox hurt the hamstring, and after the practice, he did linger after the practice for a long time, and then the next morning they made the announcement, and then P.J. Washington also had some issues with his lower back. And he returned, and it was pretty clear that Washington was playing through some soreness that he called it tightness. And so I was thinking that he might not make the trip, because Calipari was pretty clear about Knox. If there was any question, it just going back to Lexington, that was kind of Cal's take on it. But Washington played through it, and I think it was pretty clear that Cal wanted Diallo and Washington on this trip for very specific reasons, catered to each of their games and what they need to improve on. And Washington, at the beginning of this on Sunday when I was there, it was obvious that Knox was the best player. Washington actually had his worst practice, the first practice. By the end of the week by Thursday, Washington was doing things that I just couldn't believe. So I thought that those two guys were the best, with Diallo kind of right there with them.
When you projected Kentucky's starting lineup, it's been more than a month now after Kevin Knox committed and after we figured out what the roster was going to look like. You had all 3 of those guys in the starting 5. Anything that you saw last week that's made you change your mind about that group being kind of the nucleus for Kentucky's roster this fall?
Yeah, not really. And from what I've seen, it's actually more confusing for me. Because the way that, and Cal, you know how he gets hung up on these phrases. He said positionless probably, all the time. Every chance that he could, he was saying it. I think it's part of his new pitch and part of the new identity of this team. The thing that I take away is that those 3 guys sort of, they were so ambiguous. It was whoever rebounded it brought the ball up, even if it was Washington. I made a statement on Twitter that he looked more like a guard than a forward, and at times he did. He actually looked like Draymond Green, being able to protect the rim on defense and being able to hit threes on offense, or even, like I said, bring the ball up. So as far as the lineups go, it's further confused me because, and this is what happens to us, we like to put things in boxes. We like to be able to say you're a 1, you're a 2, you're a 3. For at least Knox and Washington, those guys, they just, whoever's closest to the spot on the floor, that's the spot they go to. And then Diallo all week told me he's trying to be a 1. So while we've talked about Quade Green and Gilgeous Alexander, those guys may be playing the point, Diallo's sole mission this week was to prove to Calipari that he could play the 1, and that he could play 1, 2, and 3, both offensively. And then Diallo kept bringing up to the fact that he wants to be able to defend the 1, 2, and 3. So these guys, it'd be hard for me to actually give you a 5 because I'm not sure what numbers to give these guys.
Yeah, these positionless, this topic, it's interesting for Cal. It was something he talked a lot about a couple years ago. On that first team, he tried to play 3 guards with Ulis and Murray and Briscoe. I think mostly as a way of telling all these guys that, it's okay that you all got recruited at point guards and only one of you is going to have the ball in your hand. And he didn't talk about it as much last year, but you're right. It seems like since the end of the season, especially since he got Knox and we saw what the roster is going to look like, it's been full go with, 5 2018 recruits in Colorado with him. I'm sure he was pitching it to those guys the entire time too. Do you think Kentucky can play that way positionlessly without maybe a true post player? You're talking about Washington being more of a guard forward. Could they play with Washington and Wenyen Gabriel and Knox and Diallo and Green, or do they need somebody like Sasha Clay-Jones or Nick Richards or somebody to be that true five to at least protect the paint or do whatever?
Well, that's kind of why I don't want to make too much out of this experience for Calipari, but he cut Bol and he cut Mitchell Robinson. Both those guys, 7'3" and 7'1". He kept Austin Wiley from Auburn, who's a traditional five and looks like a monster. And he kept a post from going to UNLV named Brandon McCoy. So those were the only two traditional fives that he kept. And he had, like I said, 7-foot options. And the rest of the roster is just 10 guys that can play 1 through 4, and some can slide to the 5 if they need be. So I'm thinking that Calipari, at least in this instance, maybe that could carry over to Kentucky as well, where he's not as concerned about giving up some defensively if you're gaining that much offensively. So I guess he'll just I obviously would need to see it all come together. It would be really great if there was a foreign tour this year. That'd be a lot of travel for everybody involved. But just to try to figure out, again, does Wenyen make more sense, or does SKJ make more sense? And at this point in time, I have absolutely no idea.
You talked a little bit about Diallo there and his mission to prove that he was a point guard in addition to the 2 and the 3 that we know he can play. There's been so much talk about him since January in terms of coming to campus. Obviously, everybody knows the story now. Didn't play in games the spring semester, declared for the draft, went to the combine, didn't work out for didn't play in 5-on-5 at the combine, worked out for teams individually, came back. So we had not seen Hamidou Diallo play in a real game-like atmosphere at the college level until this week. What else did you learn? Is the hype real for Hamidou Diallo?
Certainly. There was, early in the camp, there was an obvious maybe, and I don't know if it was him. I don't necessarily think he was getting his legs under him or anything like that. But there were times where it felt like he was out of the flow of the game at times, especially offensively. And Cal made mention that he had challenged Hami to get better in transition, making those decisions of when to drive it, when to pull it out, when to dish it, when to initiate the offense. So that to me early was it was pretty clear that was what he was working on, and that was one of the knocks on him. I remember in the draft was that he didn't quite have a feel for the game, and a lot of that again it comes from, I think, is that he's being pushed to be a lead guard. So now when he's out there, sometimes it does look awkward when he's got the ball. So as the week went on, though, I mean, it was just, his athleticism was just so overpowering. I mean, he really dominated in certain situations, like defending pick and rolls, and whenever he was defending and a high school recruit, which those guys held their own, but you could really see the difference in a 6'5" athletic guy like Diallo. So I got to see kind of both sides of the coin there, where there were times where he felt a little bit out of place, and when he would bail himself out with his athleticism.
Any worries at all about, I mean, Diallo and Washington are obviously going to be in Egypt with Calipari for the next couple weeks. Knox is back on campus with the rest of the team. We've heard a lot in the past about the summer being important for those guys in terms of getting together and getting their chemistry down. Years where everybody hasn't been on campus in the summer, I think back to the Harrison twins' first year, that was used as kind of a justification for their struggles early in the season, that they needed more time to adapt to each other. Any worries at all that they're kind of split now, not only not on campus, but in different continents basically for the next month or so when they might all have been in Lexington?
Yeah, I would say it'd probably be ideal to have them all in one place, but I think if Kevin Knox really needed to be in Egypt, he would have gone. And I think given what he did, he was the best player there. And I'm not saying that he didn't have an injury, but I'm saying there wasn't a lot to press it. I think that there's no coincidence that I've had the same, the things I've expressed about Washington and Diallo are the same. Sometimes they were a little bit out of place in terms of their position. They were still the top 5 guys there. I think Calipari wanted them in 5-on-5 situations, especially over in Egypt where it's, coordinated basketball, structured, so that way they could get more reps and sort of, Calipari said that he kept defining Washington. He's challenging Diallo to expand his perimeter options. So I don't think it's a problem that they're not in Lexington. I think it's more beneficial that they're in 5-on-5 situations where Calipari can really help those guys kind of define what their roles will ultimately be.
I think we all went into that week assuming that Calipari was going to keep his 3 guys around and keep the 2018 recruits around as long as he could. And a lot of people, I think myself included, assume that mean they would make the trip to Egypt if their families and everybody wanted them to go there. Having watched those guys and everybody else in the camp for a week, is it fair to say, though, that the 2 guys that made the team, plus Knox, obviously with the injury, and the recruits that made the team, were actually among the best 12 players there, and it wasn't just a situation where Calipari was keeping his guys, quote unquote, around to practice with them for the future?
Yeah, I think so. There was a lot of crossover going on. Like Purdue has Carson Edwards there. Matt Painter is on the committee. So everybody sort of had a tie or two. Obviously, Calipari's was ramped up, but I think those high school guys proved that they belong. A guy like Lewis King was somebody that I was surprised about. He's not as highly ranked as some of those other guys. And he proved to be one of those positionless players and ultimately made the team. I thought that he was one of the more surprising selections given what I would have thought coming in. So I think that those young guys earned it. If you go down the list, if you look at it on an individual case, Romeo Langford was the best true 2-guard there, or scoring, smoothest scorer, I think. I think that Cam Reddish was one of the most versatile players, could play 1 through 5, which is outrageous to say, but Calipari really was working on him as a lead guard when he got the rebound. And then again, Lewis King was versatile. And then Emmanuel Quickly was a little tired from all the events he's been doing, but he was clearly one of the best point guards and somebody that could play off as a 2 and catch and shoot as well. So the 4 guys that made it certainly deserve their spot. And then Bol being cut, that kid, he's so unique, and I think in the long run it might be a good thing for him to get cut. He had made mention of he said he needed an attitude adjustment after AAU last summer as his attitude's improved, but he's still got such a long way to go, I think, to really defining his niche and becoming his best version of himself, that I think Calipari might have cut him because in the long run responding to a cut might have been better for him.
Yeah, Kentucky fans would have to be forgiven for having a little bit of a headache already talking about guys in the next recruiting class, considering they still haven't seen the guys in the current recruiting class on campus yet. But that's how it works with Kentucky basketball. It never stops in terms of recruiting with the constant turnover in his program. Among those guys you just ran through, the 2018 recruits, obviously you're very familiar with Romeo Langford. If you haven't followed it, Fletcher is basically our go-to Romeo guy at the Courier-Journal as a local kid, the top shooting guard in the class, top 5 recruit in the country. Fletcher's got that pretty much locked down on the Romeo beat at the Courier-Journal, so you've been around him a lot. So your reaction to seeing Romeo play for the week, but also these other guys, any of them stand out specifically in terms of Kentucky and what Calipari's going to need as we kind of project forward as to who's going to be back and who's going to go after this season? Yeah,
as far as Romeo goes, one of the smoothest scorers that I've seen in a long time, and he also does things that sometimes in the AAU environment or maybe in a 5-on-5 scenario where you're seeing so many great players that some things get lost in the shuffle, like making good decisions on pick and roll or being able to defend certain actions. He just does little things so well. And I would have said going into this event that Kentucky I'm not going to say they didn't have a chance, but I felt that Kentucky was kind of in an odd spot with him because there's so much going on with that kid. He's really interested in academics. He wants to get a 4-year degree. It's not exactly Kentucky's what they're known for. I mean, this kid is kind of the antithesis of the one and done perception, but he certainly probably has the talent to be. But after the event, during the last practice I got to cover was after the 12-man cut. And this practice, I got to see one Kentucky practice last season. Cal basically structured this practice like a Wildcats practice. Obviously, it wasn't as loud, might not have said as many bad words, but it was very similar to what I got to see in Lexington last October. So Cal was stopping practice and saying things like this to Romeo. Let me quote him here. Cal said one time, "I'm telling you, Romeo, you are here to make baskets. When you're open, you need the ball and shoot. If you don't, I'm taking you out." Another time he yelled, "Shoot the ball," about as loud as I heard Cal all week. He said, "Look, kid, I'm going to say this again. This is how I coach. I don't get mad. I get excited about scoring." And so, Romeo told me after that he really appreciated that, and that he was getting coached as if he was, playing for this coach, and this was like a college level practice and the sort of the interactions he'd be having. So afterwards, I'm not sure if Romeo where he stands. He's kind of down to about eight schools, and all of them are elite. But I think that getting this opportunity, Calipari really made the most of coaching him, and he coached him really hard.
You think that plays off? I mean, we heard with name escapes me now, Muhammad Bamba, when he committed to Texas, that the relationship he established with Shaka Smart in this USA basketball was so important to that. How big is that going to be for Kentucky? I think most people, when they break down Romeo's recruiting, don't have Kentucky as a favorite for him, whether it's Louisville or Indiana or whoever else. But can this help Calipari, make up any of that perceived lost ground they may have in that race moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. And that was, and again, though, if you want to read between the lines, what Romeo told me about Archie Miller, he said, I've got to get to Indiana and see a practice. He's like, I've seen Tom Crean. And he actually said, I need to see 1 or 2 practices to get a better understanding of how this is going to be. So now, he's sitting here still, his home state school is Indiana. He has no idea really how Archie interacts with his players. He knows exactly how Calipari interacts, so it's totally an advantage, and certainly a chance for them. If all things aren't equal, and they never are, there's going to be certain campuses you like better, maybe a degree that you can get here, or proximity, whatever it may be. But all things being equal on the court, Romeo has the most knowledge about only one coach right now.
Okay, let's set Romeo aside for a second.
That's all Romeo all the time.
And so there were other 2018 recruits there. I think 5 or 6 total that they added. 6 total they added late right before the camp started. Among those 5 other guys, who do you think Kentucky needs most in that 2018 class in terms of when you look ahead, assuming they lose Kevin Knox, assuming they probably lose Hamidou Diallo, and maybe some of the older guys, but thinking that Quade Green and some of these other guys might be back, who do you think that next roster 2018-19 fits best from?
I'm going to go 3 answers with this.
There we go.
If you could just pick one, you'd take Bol because there's not anything else like him. 7'3", hits 3-pointers. He's got finesse skills in the post in terms of being able to make bounce passes, all these things. I mean, it's incredible. I'm not necessarily certain he'll be the best player, but he would be the most unique. So you would probably take him. But in terms of best fit, I would say Emmanuel Quickley is exactly what you've come to expect from Kentucky point guards with John Calipari. I would put him in the mold of, I'm not saying that he is Quade Green, but just in terms of having sort of the intangibles of leadership, multiple skills, ball handling. I would say that kid is just a fighter. He's tough. He gets through what he needs to get through. I think he's a perfect fit for Kentucky and Calipari as a point guard. But my player that I think would be the favorite to watch would be Reddish, Cameron Reddish. He came, I didn't know much about him, obviously. He came to this camp, in my eyes, on paper as a 6'7", And again, I'm in a box here. Yeah. I'm thinking of numbers. I'm thinking of positions. I'm just looking at it thinking, okay, what does this 6'7" kid do here against some of these bigger guys? And I watched him play the 1. I watched him play the 5. I mean, Calipari's talking about challenging him about being versatile. So he's kind of in that P.J. Washington mold where you're not sure exactly where he's going to play. You just know that he's going to make plays. So, there's 3 great options there, and counting Romeo. And then it'll be interesting to see if they offer Lewis King. I would say right now he and Cam Reddish are on the same AAU team. They're kind of built the same way, but I think Reddish is the better player. So we'll see. They were mentioning package deals out there, and that's hard to do. Yeah. King doesn't have an offer. It'll be interesting to see if Kentucky offers him.
So it sounds like Reddish might be the most like-for-like replacement for Kevin Knox if he loses for a year. Romeo would obviously be the obvious 2 to slide in if they lose Diallo. Do you think that Quickley and Quade Green could play on the same team if they were a sophomore year? I mean, we've seen him play multiple point guards together the last 2 years at times, but it sounds like both those guys are more in the Tyler Ulis, De'Aaron Fox mold, where it's clear they're actually a point guard, whereas Jamal Murray and Isaiah Briscoe and Malik Monk could play point guard, but we're maybe off the guard bars. We have not seen him necessarily play true out-and-out point guards together at the same time. Could that happen, or do you think Quade Green's decision will weigh heavily on whatever Quickley does in the next year?
That's a good question. I actually asked Quickley that, and he has a background as a combo guard. So I think that he's probably more versatile at projecting in that scenario than Green. And I think he played combo guard up until about 8th or 9th grade. And actually the reason he moved to point was because he grew to 6'3" and decided that if he didn't want to be an undersized 2, he wanted to be maybe an oversized or like-sized 1. So I think they could pull it off if they needed to.
Who else among that group, outside of the recruits, outside of the Kentucky guys, A couple Auburn players were in camp that Kentucky fans are going to see this year. Maybe the other guys they won't see until the tournament if that were to happen. But anybody you didn't know from college basketball at large that really impressed you over the course of the week?
Yeah, the people need to know Austin Wiley was a top 5 player there. Obviously, he made the team, so it's pretty obvious. But he was much bigger. He had a great game against Kentucky when he played. I wanted to talk to him. I didn't get the chance. He enrolled early like Hamidou too, but he decided to play. And so sometimes, we got to see his flaws though. Like he was obviously a player who'd come to high school. He is a monster now. He's physically looked better. He played really well. As far as players I didn't really know that much about, I thought Purdue's Carson Edwards was good. He made the team as a point guard. And then Peyton Pritchard, Oregon point guard, he made it. And those guys were I've got a story coming up about this, which I still need to delve into a little bit. I don't know what it was, but it was something about point guards in Calipari. Those guys were empowered and played with confidence, and they were doing their thing, and it seemed like they really took to interacting with Calipari. It was something about the point guards. There was a draw to that, and so I kept my eyes on that all week.
We love projecting starting lineups, so let's just go ahead and put you on the spot.
Oh boy,
how does Team USA run out there with the starting 5? I assume he'll move a lot of lineups around. They're going to play a bunch of games, so it might not stay the same from game to game. But if after watching them for a week, who would your 5 best players on the court be at the time with the 12 they made out there?
Whew, man, put me on the spot.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that another player I forgot to mention was Georgia Tech's. I think it's Josh Okogie. I hope I'm saying that right, because he was a very solid player. And actually our very own Jeff Greer had told me, or had tweeted at me and said that he might be an all-ACC performer for Georgia Tech, so he stood out. Here's one lineup that I did see Cal working with. This is kind of intriguing because it's young and it's positionless. Quickly, Diallo, Washington, King, and Reddish. So you got some high school players. You got the 2 Kentucky guys. I don't know if that's a starting lineup. It lacks a 5. I think Austin Wiley's got to start. Here's another lineup I saw him working with. Carson Edwards, Peyton Pritchard. That's 2 point guards together. Yeah. Romeo, Okogie, who are both kind of 2s, 3s, and Wiley. So I think you're just going to see a mix of – there's going to be times where there's 2 point guards on the floor together with that team, and then there's going to be a time where maybe there's 5 players who all look the same, and sometimes they'll be playing off the big man, Austin Wiley, or maybe UNLV's Brandon McCoy.
And then one last topic on Team USA before we shift to focus a little bit. You and some of the other guys who were in Colorado, it seemed like John Calipari was really in his element for the week. We've talked about the players, but now for the coach. How big a deal was this for Calipari to get to coach this team in terms of whatever he wants to do with Team USA in the future, but to get the recruiting, to get the guys on campus, obviously. But it seemed like just from afar that this was an event that Calipari was really at his top Calipari moments at.
It's the best mood I've seen him in, and the media attention obviously was much different than it is in Lexington. A couple things I think that Calipari really liked. One, he's out there with Danny Manning, Tad Boyle. Those are guys that he has experience with from his Kansas days when he first broke into the industry. I think he's really comfortable out there with those guys. Archie Miller's walking around. Sean Miller's out there. These are guys that I think we've talked about in the past that Calipari has a good relationship. But then, too, this is what Calipari does on an annual basis. And at a micro sense, he basically was tasked with, finding a team in 3 days and then spending the next 3 days getting them ready. And now they're in Egypt. And it was kind of like just a condensed version of what Calipari has spent the last, almost decade now at Kentucky doing. So I think he really enjoys saying, okay, let's split these 5 up and let's go play and see who does what. And they did that for 2 or 3 days. And every time he met with us, I had to say, I was like, man, that's the nicest that's the most not sad that he had to talk to us that I've seen him. So, and then too, he really, it struck me too that whenever he got the team down to 18 and then down to 12, it was, okay, in 5-on-5 situations, he's blowing the whistle after every play and coaching after every play. It was kind of funny. He actually said this about Austin Wiley. He says, I'm coaching this kid to beat me next season. Yeah. He's like, but this is what I love to do. So he was really into it. And like I said, it was structured like a Kentucky practice. They were putting in kind of Kentucky-like principles on offense and working on pick and roll on defense. And I think he had a lot of fun constructing. It was kind of like playing fantasy sports or something, just in a week, and it was in real life.
So Team USA U19 team starts 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time against Iran on Saturday, July 1st. Sunday, they play at 12:15. Monday, they play at 10:30 in group stage. We'll have coverage of that on the Courier Journal's website, courier-journal.com, and in the print edition of the paper. Fletcher still has some content he's rolling out from Colorado that you may need to make sure you check out on the website. The other big story last week in UK basketball was, of course, the NBA draft. De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, Bam Adebayo all went in the lottery, part of a run of a bunch of freshmen, a bunch of one-and-done players going early in the draft, which has been kind of the talking point since then. Anything surprise you about where those guys fell? Monk slipped to 11. Bam went at 14, maybe a little earlier than some people thought. I think Fox was pretty much right on the money where people had projected him. Any surprises for you from the draft night as a whole?
Yeah, I think that it's pretty clear that Calipari wins again with, Bam Adebayo and some of these mocks, respected mocks. I mean, he's not even in the first round. And Cal, made Bam go pro, essentially. Or he didn't make him, but he told him, what are you doing? Why are you thinking about this? And I'm thinking, looking at the mock, I understood why Bam might have been thinking about it. He's clearly in the lottery, goes to the Heat. It was a no-brainer. So it's good advice again. One thing I did question was the potential for Sacramento to draft Malik Monk at 10 to pair him with De'Aaron, which would have been, classic Kentucky to the NBA move. And they trade down. And I felt like this draft had maybe 12 guys that could, be, household names. And to have the 10th pick and to trade out of it, it would have been interesting, I think, to see Malik and De'Aaron play together. Maybe that might be better in the long run for both of them to separate, but I don't know. So it surprised me that Malik's not in New York or potentially teaming with De'Aaron.
Yeah, New York was the team that Calipari said on the broadcast that he had hoped that the Knicks were going to take Monk. He thought he would have thrived there with the spotlight and the offense and all those sorts of situations. Ends up sliding to Charlotte. I don't know that there are two more different markets in terms of exposure in the NBA than New York and Charlotte, but he's there with Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. Obviously, De'Aaron Fox is in Sacramento now with Willie Cauley-Stein and Scala Bissiere. Bam Adebayo gets to start his own Kentucky pipeline with the Heat. So those three guys are going to all be in Summer League, although I think it came out today as we're recording this on Tuesday that Monk maybe has an ankle injury and won't play in the first Summer League. The other Kentucky guys, Isaiah Briscoe, Dominique Hawkins, Derek Willis, Isaac Humphries, have all found Summer League teams and are going to try and make a roster. You were the one who kind of broke the news on Hawkins. What do you think of the fits, the landing spots for those four guys?
Yeah, Hawkins was down to the 76ers in Sacramento, and he spent a lot of time. That news came out about most of those Summer League guys real early, and Hawkins was all the way up until almost midnight on Friday, still kind of going over that decision to go with Sacramento. So he's very serious. Obviously, all these guys are very serious about making the team, but that was a tough decision for him because, again, you really need to look at what's available and the rosters and the makeup of these things. So we'll see. I know that there's a certain pop about Dominique Hawkins. People are very interested in him, obviously being a Kentucky guy. I'm interested personally in seeing what Isaac Humphries can do this summer. I don't know if maybe the Wizards have him in a different role than he's played at Kentucky, or maybe he'll be more assertive or a little bit more confident. See what he can do. I mean, 7-footer that's as skilled as him, those don't just sort of fall off in your lap. So we'll see what he can do with the Wizards. We will be watching for all those guys this summer in the Summer League in Vegas and Utah and Orlando as they try and start their professional careers. Kentucky, the current team, will be on campus and working out while Calipari is in Egypt. One last bit of UK news to get to before we close this one out. I just want to briefly touch on a story that we had last week that was perhaps the most popular story that I have ever written on the Courier Journal's website based on our metrics. As just some background here, as part of a routine kind of house cleaning situation that we do, and most reporters around the country do that cover college programs as part of the Open Records Act, you can file to see what self-reported NCAA violations a school has throughout the year. And so during the summer, we filed to ask what Kentucky had reported to the NCAA in terms of rules violations since July of last year, so what they had done for the 2016-17 year. And there were 17 violations. They were all minor. They were all Type 3, which means no suspensions were involved. There was one that got them fined from, I think, women's golf, because they played a player who turned out to be ineligible because she had incorrectly been certified by the transfer department in the actual academic side of the university. There were
5 from the women's basketball program, so maybe that was a little bit noteworthy with the turnover that program has had. But the real headline violation that we wrote about and that got most of the attention is that the Kentucky football program, for the season opener against Southern Miss last year, provided 2 tickets to Brittany Wagner, who was the academic advisor at East Mississippi Community College and the star of Last Chance U, the Netflix documentary about that program, came to Kentucky. It was pretty publicized when she came. I think she submitted to her Twitter followers before the season started, where should she go for the first couple of weeks. Ended up in Kentucky, did a couple of radio interviews while she was here, tweeted a bunch of pictures while she was on campus, was with A.J. Stamps, a former UK player who went to East Mississippi throughout the weekend. Well, it turns out that Lamar Thomas, the wide receivers coach, left 2 tickets for her at will call on the request of the SEC Network color analyst for the week. That was a violation. She could have gotten the tickets through UK's pass system for recruits, but because she was an employee at East Mississippi, a junior college where Kentucky recruits players, she could not get them through will call. So Kentucky had to turn that in. The staff got an educational session about rules, and the SEC actually ruled they could not recruit or could not make off-campus contact with East Mississippi for 30 days after that. So nothing major, but at least noteworthy that a reality or TV documentary, whatever you want to call it, star got Kentucky in a little bit of trouble with the NCAA last year.
Yeah, that was good reporting on your part. How do you think a mix-up or a miscommunication like that happened? I mean, obviously, Kentucky self-reported it, so it's not like they were hiding anything. But how do you imagine maybe that transpired?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the way that the document we get back works is it says how they found it, and the way they found this violation was someone in the ticket office was reviewing the will call list after the game, saw her name, and I assume realized who she was because of her notoriety with the documentary, and realized that was a violation, that she shouldn't have been able to get them through will call. She should have been on the pass list. So that person notified the compliance director, and then they submitted it. Lamar Thomas says he did not know who Brittany Wagner was, did not know that the color analyst from the SEC Network was asking him to leave tickets for a community college player, staffer, and if he had, obviously he would have done it the right way around. I thought that was a little interesting because of the publicity around her visit at the time, and knowing I knew who she was just looking at the paper, and I've not actually watched Last Chance U. I would have thought that a football coach would have known that, but maybe Lamar just doesn't watch very much TV. What do we know? So let's give him the benefit of the doubt. He didn't know. So it was a fairly understandable mistake if he had no idea who Brittany Wagner was and he just thought he was doing a favor for a friend. Some of the other rules violations on this list, though, and you can look at our website, you can still Google it, the Last Chance U ticket violation, it'll show up, were just ridiculous in terms of what the NCAA rules are. There was a track violation where Edric Floriel had to self-report the head coach because he had accidentally auto-replied a response to a recruit who could have texted him, but it was in a hard time of the year where the coach couldn't text him back. He could talk to him on the phone, and so he calls him during a meeting. Floriel's in a meeting, so he can't answer the phone, and accidentally hits the auto-reply text message feature on his phone that says, sorry, can't answer the phone right now. Well, it was a time where he could talk to him on the phone, but he couldn't send him electronic communication, so that was a violation. There were a couple things where the women's basketball program got cited because they had contact with a recruit outside of her home or school because they were recruiting 2 players at the same school, visited both of them at the school, then went to dinner with one of them at the player's house, and the other prospect came with them to dinner, but because it wasn't at her house or her school, that was a violation. So there are all sorts of nitpicky rules. It's really easy to understand how maybe some of this gets lost in translation. They have all sorts of computer programs and whatever to track this stuff to prevent it as much as possible. But nothing on that list was egregious or concerning if you're a Kentucky fan. I think the biggest takeaway, other than the Last Chance U thing, is the NCAA has a lot of dumb rules.
Yeah. Our technological advances, wow, I couldn't talk there, are way more advanced than the rule book is, I believe.
Yeah, and there were a couple, too, where they, there was a soccer program one where they called the same, 2 different coaches called the same prospect once in the same week, which is a violation, but the NCAA had already passed a rule that would have made that not a violation, but the rule wasn't going to go in effect for 7 more days, so it was still a violation. I mean, all sorts of stupid stuff like that. And I encourage you to check that out just to see what these coaches have to deal with in terms of NCAA rules outside of the obvious things you don't do, like pay recruits and so on and so forth. There's a lot of other things that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that was interesting. That was a good get. That was a good story.
So we're going to have a lot of more coverage, like we said earlier, of both Team USA, the Kentucky guys in Summer League and the NBA this week. Got a bunch of football recruiting news coming on the Courier-Journal this weekend, with focused on some guys in Louisville, specifically Rondale Moore, who committed to Texas over the weekend, and Stephen Herron, the 2019 defensive lineman, who's a 4-star guy, a top prospect in the state. What they're doing for the future, what their plans are this summer, why they've included Kentucky on their lists and not Louisville. Look for that in the next couple of days. We'll have lots of coverage throughout the week in both the print edition of the Courier-Journal and at courier-journal.com. I'm John Hale. Follow me on Twitter at JohnHale_CJ. He's at Fletcher Page on Twitter. Until next week, thanks for listening.